Well, you know what, man? I think we're just going to skip the formalities. An astute guest that we both consider a mentor as well as a friend. Anyway, yeah, I would, we have been mentored by this guy for a long time. I mean, I'm trying to think of my earliest recollections
I thought about that today.
of working with him, but they kind of blur because I think I might have run into him once or twice before we really started working together a lot. So, and primarily with Joe Granson's group, many configurations of that. Almost 15 years, probably something like that.
Maybe more, bro.
Maybe more. But I'm
Yeah.
but like pretty consistently, like
Yeah.
um
I remember I had heard about him before I even played with him, right? And he'll probably remember this, but or maybe not. I remember I was playing at this place in Vinings called The Grape with Ben Taylor, a drummer who used to live here.
mhm.
And I can't remember if he had a regular bass player or he was just calling cats. And he called me one day, week before the gig. Dude, we got Neal Starkey on the gig. I said, you were able to get Neal Starkey for this gig? He was like, yeah, I got Neal Starkey. I was like, oh man, I got a shed, man. And so I remember just like thinking, what am I going to play, with this cat? And then it was just one of the easiest gigs ever. He knew every tune, everything. He was just so big satellite dish ears, could hear everything. And the feel
Mhm.
was great. And he had a great attitude. And I was like, wow, this cat is for real,
Wrong. And
So
we're going to talk about some of the signals that this cat will give you if it's not happening. And I've seen this many of time. Without further ado, we're going to bring in the legend himself, the great Neal Starkey. Neal!
Hey, Irving Farquhart's here.
Oh, we
Laying
forgot.
Yeckrats.
do it.
Oh, yeah.
A
So,
veritable
yeah.
cesspool of culture.
So that's your name backwards, right?
Laying Yeckrats, yep.
But Neal, you're responsible for so much music through decades of being an Atlanta musician, and
a fixture of it.
you've seen so many generations. We're going to talk about that too, is the generations of musicians, because now you're seeing a different generation. So it's going to be interesting to hear your take on what you think is going on now. But let's go back to the beginning.
No, 1957. I think I was in ninth grade of junior high school.
So ninth grade. Yeah. When did you start playing bass? Is that when you started playing bass?
Yeah. They needed a bass player, and I had a few horrible years of violin. I still have my grandmother's violin.
Oh, wow.
But they needed a bass player, and I thought, one student, not many notes, easy A. I'm studying to be an electrical engineer. Sure, why not? And then I fell in love with the instrument. I had about 5 or 10 minutes on my half-hour lunch hour, and then I would practice some in the rest of the time. And the book he had me on was Samandal, and I learned on the G string up to a C. And that was the extent of my lessons. Well, he threw me into things that were way, way over my head. I mean, I remember going to a Schenectady Symphony rehearsal with this plywood bass that the neck was not connected properly. And in order to get it in my mom's Plymouth Valley, you tune down the strings, take the neck and fold it over and stick it in the car sideways. And then, this would be in the winter. And so I'd be sitting in the crook of the bass, waiting for mom to pick me up in the Plymouth Valley.
Wow.
But other times, like when I finally started playing jazz a few years later, like in 1960 or thereabouts, I'd take my bass to this jazz club on a balloon tire bicycle with the bass strapped to my back. And the police would stop me at 3 o'clock in the morning. Hey, boy, where are you going? Well, sir, I'm not driving yet.
Wow.
Fun stuff.
So why the bass, Neal? I mean, is it why the bass?
Accidents will happen. I have no idea. He needed a bass. The school system teacher needed a bass. And so, I was 6'2", and football, basketball, track, and all that stuff. So he figured, this is the guy to maybe do it. And so, basically he stuck me in the marching band, and he was like, well, do or die, kid.
How did you transition from, I don't know if you ever fully transitioned, but it's a parallel to Herbie Hancock, who was also an electrical engineer as well. And I guess you guys' minds think like that. How did you go from being an electrical engineer to saying, I'm a first call bass player? Like, when did that present itself?
Well, mononucleosis, I guess. So I went
mono, and it changed everything.
And I went off to college to St. Lawrence University, which was like the 3-2 program. You get 3 years for a BA, and then you could go to either RPI or MIT to get a BS degree. And in my sophomore year of St. Lawrence, I wound up with mono and wound up going back to Schenectady.
Wow.
And but I really hadn't been playing much in the way of jazz yet. But I had worked some summer resort things with a professor from RPI, a guy named John Parks. And he actually hired me away as a waiter in one of the Lake George summer resorts to work at this place called Bonneview. I have recordings of all of that. And I actually had to join the Schenectady local. Apparently none of the bass players wanted to travel, 60 miles north and live at Lake George for the summer. And so, we were playing this gig, and then I got a sock cymbal so that I could play a little rhythm along with it. So with my left foot, I was playing the sock cymbal. And then we went to we'd have a hamburger at this restaurant after work. And on the jukebox was like Billy Rose, Billy Eckstein, some guy named Billy Evans, and there were 2 tunes. What is this thing called Love? And Periscope. And I thought, Periscope, that's a weird name for a song. And we listened to those 2 tracks, and it was like, holy mackerel. Scott LaFaro and Ball Motion and all that. So we spent the rest of the summer trying to figure out that chordal system.
Right.
And that was it.
And what year would you estimate?
1960. Yeah, 1959, 1960, something like that. I graduated from high school in 1960. So it could have been between 11th and 12th grade or something like that.
So that was kind of your introduction to jazz and to.
Yeah. And then when I was back in Schenectady between colleges, Nick Brignola apparently got my name from somebody, and then he hired me to play with a heavyweight drummer named Dick Burke. It was like get the aspirin whenever Dick Burke was playing, because he was played really loud, and I was playing with a plywood bass with no amp. Ralph Casals was a guitar player, and we were playing Autumn Leaves and Stella by Starlight. I didn't know any of those tunes. So you either learn them fast or, they won't hire you again. And before that, my first professional gigs were with Italian and Polish wedding bands. And of course, all of that, that's fairly simple stuff to do. So you kind of get the idea that, this chord's always pretty much going to go to that chord with little variations and stuff like that. And they would pick me up at my parents' house and drive me to the gig and stuff like that.
So you were picking up theoretical concepts without taking theory. So you didn't know, hey, this is the 2 of 5 and the dominant, secondary dominant. You didn't know that. You just knew the magnetism of where the chord arrived or was attracted to, right?
You go where the sounds are, yeah.
Beautiful. Wow.
I had no clue about it. There were no mentors in Schenectady. Wow. And he even working with Nick, he played bass as well as Barry sax and I think another instrument. And but they didn't, have the time to tutor me or anything like that. I just had to figure it out. In the Northeast, where the energy levels are really high, it's kind of like do or die. And with the dance bands, for example, you had basically one course to learn the song, a second one to hone it in, because they're probably taking the song out on the third tune. If you can't figure out a tune in three takes, they don't want to hire you again.
Right. Okay.
And I got to Atlanta actually, I was working around Schenectady and pretty much doing whatever there was. And a bass player that was a psychologist came to town, and he figured a good way to get rid of the competition was to find him a gig out of town. So he found me a gig in Oklahoma City with one of the old Castro sisters. They made a hit called Hearts Made of Stone or something like that. So I took the train with my bass and a few clothes to Chicago and then down to Oklahoma City. They picked me up at the bus station, found me a room for $35 a month with 2 meals. And I went to work in this club that lasted for 4 weeks. And then I was out of work and stranded in Oklahoma City. But, I'd made jam sessions, so I already was able to establish a reputation. And stayed there for a couple of years. Actually, I wound up working with a guy named Dick Shreve, who was the pianist on the Made in Japan with Benny Goodman album.
Oh, wow.
From there, I went to work with a guy named Johnny Gilbert, who recorded on IRR Records in Abilene, Texas. Very interesting place. And then I got an offer to make my first record with a lady named Mary Fields in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I moved to Albuquerque, and we worked in a jazz club for about 3 or 4 years, and had a good time there. But when the work scene got scrawny, I went on the road with a Hawaiian band, and that's what brought me to Atlanta. We came to Atlanta twice. And, when you're playing with a Hawaiian band, you're starving to play. So I would sit in with the band at the Regency Hyatt House Atlantis Club. Back in Albuquerque, I was between jobs because I'd been traveling with another band. And I got a call one day, you want to come to Atlanta to play shows? And so I moved to Atlanta in September 1969. I worked some of the Lounge Lizard gigs for a while, and then eventually ran into a guy named Dan Wall. He was about 16, 17, 18, I think, at that point. And then a few years later into an Austrian guitar player named Karl Rotzer. And that's when all our, some really fun stuff started breaking loose. And that's when I started getting into pedals and altering my Mutrons, my octa dividers, my ring modulators, and all that kind of stuff.
This is a sore spot for me when you talk about these pedals. So,
oh Lord, I know what's coming.
Are you a purist?
I was getting to the roads. I was at a recording session at 800 East. I get this call from Neal. It's like, hey, man, I went to the Athens house, and I got a bunch of these pedals, man. I don't know if you're interested in them or not. I was like, well, what do you have? So he tells me what he has. I said, I'm coming over right now. We had a break, right? I said, man, okay, I'll get with you. He says, in all fairness, I want to let you know, I put in a call of Marlon Patton, too. I was like, oh, snap. I got to get down there before Marlon does, right? So I get down there, I see this Boss pedal, which I wasn't really interested in it, but I was doing a session with Kyrie, and I saw the 2 Mutron pedals. I saw another a ring modulator, something else. You had an old Fender bass in there, and I said, well, I have this session I got to go to, Neal. How much do you want for him? He's like, well, just make me an offer. So something said to give him the money that was in my wallet. I won't tell people how much that money was, but it wasn't nearly as much as it. So I said, Neal, don't worry about it. I'm interested in the pedals. Once you figure out what it's going to cost, whatever, call me back and I'll come after the session and come get the pedals, right? It wasn't, but 5 minutes later, I get this call from Neal. Says, hey, man, how you doing? He said, I talked to Bill Hatcher. He's like, I think I'm going to get him to sell it for me. I was like, no. And then I looked up online, and it was like that one Mutron pedal was going for like $1,200. I was like, I had it in my hands. But I'll tell this story too. I also got a beautiful Fender Rhodes. If anybody knows my Rhodes, the brown one, 88 Rhodes, Neal is notorious for really giving people stuff as long as they use it. And so he gave me that Rhodes for $200.
Wow.
And he had tweaked it out already. He had the pickup set up just like Chick Corea would have them. I was like, that is a beautiful instrument. So Neal, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
That instrument, that was the full size 88 key one.
Yes, full size 88.
It's interesting how I got to that because my grandmother was in an old folks home in Greenville, South Carolina, and she was like a stride pianist of the old school, and she was great. But people wouldn't let her practice. They only wanted her to play church music, and every time she'd play those old pop songs, they'd get mad at her. So she painted a keyboard so she could practice in her room. And I thought that, I said, Grant, won't they let you play? She said, no, I just can't play. I said, I've got a solution. So I found a Wurtelizer, the Wurlitzer, desk thing with the speakers on it.
Right.
Brought it over with a set of headphones so she could practice. Well, a few years later she died, and I brought it back to Atlanta, and I traded, I think, Francis Wallace for a 77 key, the 77 keys.
The 73 for
73 key, okay, and then. I had that for a while, kind of sitting around. And then I was playing a gig with Margaret Ingram, a pianist, a kind of cocktail pianist. And she said, boy, this thing is really too heavy for me to carry around. And so I said, well, I'll be glad to trade pianos with you. Because actually, the only reason I wanted the Fender Rhodes was because I was going to take the pickups out of it and mount them on my string bass as a pickup system.
Price. Nick Gannon said, hearing how much he sold that Rose to you for made me cuss out. But look, hey, on that same gig was Chris Burroughs. He was like, "Hey man, you don't need that."
Yeah, Chuck Mangione carried a full size '88 stage model on the road when we did that gig.
Crazy.
So, yeah. Can you imagine the airlines dealing with that?
They had all those cats, didn't they? I mean, they had a Hammond, they had a Rhodes. Go back to Neal. Go back to, you're playing, I guess, different styles of music, and then you sort of discover jazz, but then you're playing in a Hawaiian band, you're playing in a show band, you're playing with doing shows, all this kind of stuff. How did you start to kind of just make sense of was it all just music to you? It didn't really matter kind of what it was, or how did you decipher kind of like how to play and get into playing different styles?
Just sounded right, just felt right. And, like if I was doing an R&B gig or something like that, I would be thinking in terms of the bass drum pedal. I would try to take my clue from that. If it was a consistent beat, then I would probably emulate that. But if he was switching up all the time, then I would probably maybe settle on a beat and stay there. If it was a country western gig, I mean, I had to kind of learn the hard way in Albuquerque, New Mexico, when I played my first country western gig, and I'm all into Scott LaFaro and Ray Brown and all that kind of stuff, and I'm doing skips. And after the first tune, the guy says, "Could you play a few less notes?" And by about 3 tunes in, he says, "Maybe you could just play half notes." Oh God, is this what I'm into for the evening? That's what it was. Right. So you kind of have to learn to play within the framework of what they're hiring you to play. That's still really keeping your identity, though.
That's really important what you just said, to play within the framework. Me and Chris talk about being creative within a box, like whatever the parameters are, being creative. And you kind of eloquently said that as you can play in a given situation, but not lose your identity. What would you say your identity, like if you had to sum up what you are as a bass player, what would that be?
I don't know. Me. my first influences, the first jazz that I heard, I think was in 10th grade. I heard the Oscar Peterson Trio with Ray Brown. Right. And I was like, wow, this is, no more Fats Domino, no more Elvis Presley, no more pop stuff. Because that's what I was listening to all before that. Then I heard the Bill Evans thing. And, so Ray Brown, Scott LaFaro, and then my next influence would probably be the bass player that did the Chick Corea Now He Sings, Now He Sobs album. Miroslav?
Yes.
Yeah. Those were probably my main influences. Electric bass I kind of picked up 10 years after string bass, and I would love to have been able to play like Jocko, but no.
But you have some Ron Carter influence in your playing too, I hear some.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah. And I mean, I like Major Holly. I liked Albert Stinson. Actually, John Hurd took me to a jam session out in San Francisco with Charlie Rausch and Thelonious drummer.
Mm-hmm.
How much listening were you doing, Neal? I mean, were you when you talk about your influences and you talk? I mean, were you listening to a lot of music at one time? Has that been a constant sort of in your life where you're always kind of listening to something? How important is listening in terms of just your process?
Well, in Schenectady, I had eventually purchased a portable phonograph called the KLM. It had 2 speakers and a turntable and amplifier. And I think by then I had maybe 150 albums. Stockhausen's Gazanga de Kinderd, Morton Subotnick, John Cage, the 5 rooms with people talking in all the different rooms. And a whole lot of different jazz styles. So I was listening to an awful lot of stuff.
How did that translate into your playing, though? How did you amass this playing?
I don't know. It just sort of happened on the bandstand. One of the harder lessons, well, a couple of interesting lessons. Once in Schenectady, I was playing with Nick Brignola, and I think it was Ben Webster or Coleman Hawkins, one of those guys, was playing downstairs in this jazz club. He came up and sat in with us, and I was into Scott LaFaro and doing all kinds of crap. And he didn't say anything, but a year later, he came back to town, and Nick said, just play straight time. And so after the tune, he turns around and says, "Say, I see you learned how to play time." I said, oh. During that period at this jazz club, I played with Mose Allison.
Wow.
And that was I actually have recordings of that too. That was interesting because here's this bedraggled book of stuff, and I'm barely able to get the half notes and the chords because I didn't have any idea what the numbers and the minus signs and all that stuff was. So whatever he was playing, at least the root was there. And all of a sudden, nothing's matching. And I'm panic stricken, wondering, geez, now what? And of course, I'm listening to what he's doing and staying with him. And I happen to glance over, and there's this Cheshire grin smile on his face. And I'm saying, what? So
that's a wonderful parallel because that's what Oscar Peterson used to do to Ray Brown. So those little kind of things on a bandstand. Yeah. And Ray Brown got mad and threw those was it tacks or pennies or something in the piano? Yeah. It was a story where because Oscar Peterson was known for just playing jokes. Well, really hardcore jokes. It was we'll do all the things you are and do it in another key. And Ray Brown was like, "What is going on?"
Yeah.
So, So that's interesting.
Well, that got played on me in Schenectady also. I sat in with this group, and it was a great sounding group in this hotel. And the time was great, and the chords sounded good to me. And so I get on the bandstand, and all of a sudden things get loose and swishy, and the chords are not working. And I'm trying to figure out what the tune is, and it's loosey goosey. And they were like New Yorkers that are testing this old country boy from Schenectady to see if he could figure it out.
Wow.
Good lessons.
Were you ever a practice guy? Were you ever,
No.
It was just all on just gig after gig after gig?
Yeah, the only gig I ever practiced for was the Bernstein Jazz Mass with the Atlanta Symphony.
Wow.
I hated practice, but I love jam sessions, and so you could learn a lot there. Now, I did go to a jam session in Schenectady, and they played a tune that I didn't know, and I recorded it, and I listened to the tape yesterday, and the sax player was like, Yeah, this poor guy has no idea where he is. And I mean, I'm hearing him say this and I'm realizing, yeah, I don't know. I have no idea where we were. And he's not feeding me any harmonics because there was no keyboard on it. He's not feeding me anything that's going to give me a clue as to where we are. I erased that tape. It was embarrassing. I learned everything pretty much at the College of Hard Knocks.
Right.
Even reading, when I came to Atlanta, I could barely read quarter notes, and I really only knew up to about a C or thereabouts on the G. My first session was with a guy named John Barbie, who was a Juilliard graduate, could hear that 23rd violin who had just played a wrong note and stuff like that.
Wow.
So we're in the studio, and it's an eighth note. They're like do 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 do, and at the end of it, doom do doom doom do doom, bossa nova beat. I had no idea what the rhythm was for a bossa nova beat, but you always run through these things once, and so I hear the horns do it, and I say, oh, okay, so I must be running parallel to them, and then at the end, I'm hearing the drummer do the bossa nova thing, and we got through that session fine. At that time, I was playing with Gloria Loring, and Jack Riley helped me get that show straight because I was clueless. And the next recording session with Barbie, he wrote something out, and we played the session, and Starkey, come here. I thought, well, that's the end of my recording career. He said, you didn't play what I had written, but I like what you played. What do you need? What do you do? I said, well, I don't have any idea about the nomenclature, but if you'll give me the root of the chord, I'll hear the harmonics, what that's going on after that. You can just give me the changes, and then when you want me to play with the band, write out a line, and I'll hear what they're doing, and I'll know what to do. And so we did a lot of sessions for a number of years that way. And in the meantime, I was getting my reading up. And I didn't start getting the classical work in Atlanta until Martha Bishop hired me to do Handel's Messiah. And we're down in Carrollton, Georgia, and there's it says senza and consenza on the page, and I have no idea what that meant. So I asked the cello players, and they didn't know what it meant either. So we start playing, and I realized, oh, wait a minute. We're playing the same line and they're an octave above. Okay. And when I don't know the notes, it's harmonious. So you can say, oh yeah, da 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 da, whoop, 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 whoop. So you could get through this classical piece while still being a very rudimentary reader. Wow. But all of these things led up to getting the chance to play the Tony Bennett, Neal Hefti show. And after that, by then my reading skills were getting better, and after that the whole Atlanta show scene and concert scene was mine.
Neal Hefti was a heck of an arranger, man.
Yeah. The hardest person to play was the Burt Bacharach show. We did that at the Fox and also at Chastain Park, and here's a measure of 2 or 3 in the middle of this, and you're going,
right,
what?
Yeah, it's hard to take that one, isn't it?
Yeah, no way.
Right.
I love playing the standard classics because they're harmonically easy to do, but to sit down and play Schoenberg or something like that would be a bear.
Right.
The next challenge was when Karl Rotzer from Vienna, Austria moved to Atlanta in the mid 70s, I think it was. And, there'd be a bar of 7 and several bars of 4 mixed in with a bar of 9 or something, where we'd be playing Speak Funk Easy in 7/8 time.
Right.
And I mean, you just had to hear it, really. I was glued to the music, but you just had to hear it. Or he'd do Red Clay, and he'd play the first sequence through on time, but then he'd displace the next one by 1/8 of a note.
Oh, wow.
And if you got off, you were screwed.
You're messed up. Obviously, you went from being mentored to playing gigs, and maybe you didn't know you were mentoring others like myself and Chris. You met me and Chris when we were way younger and playing the music. So I'm curious to know, I hate to even ask this question. What did you think about us when we were coming up? Even if you even think about that at all. But we were like coming up and fresh in this music, man. You were like a staple. So you went from a role of being mentored to playing all this stuff, and now you're mentoring others. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I don't think I ever thought about things like that.
Right.
I mean, you guys were doing what you were doing, and I was enjoying very much what you were doing. Now it's a challenge for me to figure out what you're liable to do next, because I don't want to stay absolutely with you, but I want to stay somewhere in the vicinity.
I tell people all the time, whenever I'm on a gig with you, and we laughed about this at Red Light, where I'm leaning on you. I want to know the changes that you play. And Neal, you told me just this past Wednesday, you're like, yeah, but I'm really listening to see what you're going to play. I've learned so many songs, so many different ways of playing changes, and just keep my ear home by playing with you, man. I really appreciate you being next to you, playing all the time, man. It's been a lesson, and you have like great ears. You challenged me, man. At the same time, you've taught me a lot of songs on a gig without using verbiage, but just laying it out for me in a way where I can hear it, even though I don't know anything about this at all. But you would play a root enough times for me to know this is what's going on. So, man, I really appreciate that schooling and learning that money couldn't pay for.
Well, you want to be sensitive to what's going on around you, right. But if you know somebody doesn't know a song, if you can feed them changes that lead them in the right direction, because the pianist or the chord player or the horn player is harmonically leading you to what notes you can play and what you can't. One of the other hard lessons was Dan Wall had a tendency to play a lot of, I think, augmented chords. Well, as a bass player, there's a lot of notes that you can't play.
Right.
And figuring those out was a challenge. Now, Chris, you think you're looking for a comfortable zone between you to so that everything works. And I don't know how to really explain that, but there's a comfort zone.
I couldn't say it any better than what Tyrone just said. I mean, I think the thing that when I started playing with you up until now, we just played together this past Saturday, I believe. The thing that always strikes me with you, Neal, is there's a freedom there. I don't have to mark everything. I don't have to really worry about you getting off no matter what I do, because you're either going to respond to it or you're going to add to it, and you're going to take it somewhere else where it's going to be, oh, okay, he's hearing that, let's go there. You can't ask for much more than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's one of the few places that I actually can play in teamwork. A big band for me, maybe a giant football team, but I don't like the lines that the horn players write for the bass, and so I play my own stuff, except where I think that I have to play what they required. And that was one of the reasons that I was glad not to be doing dance music anymore, because eventually the musicians kind of became like assembly line workers. The tune has to be that way, and it's the only way that he can do it. And you say, well, the bass player played a wrong note there. Why in this bluegrass tune do I have to play that note? With Joe, I had to not play some tunes, because like where I was used to hearing a tune that the bass player starts on the fifth, he doesn't want that. He wants the root. And so I had, there's like one or two Christmas songs where he wants to hear that root. And
right.
You just have to.
You just give them what they want. Yeah.
Do it.
Right. You are also famous, or should I say infamous, for other things as well. So I'll give you a scenario. I think I was playing with somebody at the Ritz Hotel in Lake Oconee, in another area, and you and somebody else, a couple of people were playing in the lobby lounge at Ritz at Lake Oconee. So I see this music stand, right? And I said, man, Neal knows every tune. Why does he have a music stand sitting up there and he's killing, right? And so I go over, it's like, Neal, what are you reading? Neal was reading a book while he was completely sold out. He wasn't even listening to the Cats playing. So that you have these things where if the music is possibly not happening, you will zone out and do something else.
Neal's gone, man.
I got that magazine reputation from a big band that I was playing at the Regency. That the drummer thought I was reading all this old big band music, and he looked over and I was reading a popular mechanics article on waterproofing your basement. And another gig I was on with a show band, and we had played the same stuff over and over, Mom's Apple Pie type stuff. An earbud in my ear, because in the amateur radio bands, I had a gadget at the house called Melvin. And Mel would take the ASCII characters that came off the DX alert thing, DX meaning distance in the foreign, some guy in a foreign country broadcasting on a certain frequency, and it would say, gosh, I'm missing a country that I wanted to work on the ham radio, but I'm playing a gig. So that's where I got that. But there were a lot of other guys that on the Broadway shows, especially during the days when there was space between the tunes, where they didn't load you up with a million notes. And Cecil Welch and Harry Hagen and some of the other horn players, they'd be watching football games during the Broadway shows at the Fox Theater. Yeah, excellent.
The drummer is having time issues.
Oh, man.
Neal would purposely speed up the song. I'm like, Neal, what's going on? Well, he's going to listen eventually.
Well, we have had some drummers that insist on taking an up tempo and taking it to La La Land. So I said, well, okay, how far into La La Land do you want to go? Okay, well, I guess we're going to rush the fast tunes. How fast can you go? Or they're going to drag the slow tunes down to nothing.
Right. Or if the keyboard, I've heard you play with the piano. If the piano player is playing some sorry chords or something, you will figure out what they're playing and you'll play it with them to just accentuate how bad it is. I've heard it so many times. Like,
I generally don't get emotionally involved, except every once in a while. If you get, a guy who's a real egomaniac and he's playing, 1-3-1-3-5, and so, oh, okay, this is a blues, da 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 da. So yeah, sure, okay, let's go there.
Well, we had a gig. I think it was at the Botanical Gardens. It was me, you, and John Sanford. I don't know if you remember that gig. Mm-hmm. And we were waiting around a long time, and then all of a sudden people started coming in. So John Sanford said, let's play a blues in G. Do you remember this situation? Uh-huh. So he says, let's play a blues in G. He starts to count it off. I turn and look at you, and you have the smile on your face, right? And I said to myself, I know Neal is going to play the tritone sub. He's going to play a C sharp. So it would have worked if I would have played the chord I originally was going to play. But I decided to play the most dissonant D flat kind of chord in the world. Really? And we play it, and John Sanford turns around. Are we in G? Neal, me and you just bust out laughing. We just shook our head and said, yeah, we're in G. And after the song was over, John Sanford's like, what happened? I said, that's totally my fault. I was like, I saw this look on Neal's face, and I just knew he was going to play a C sharp. And if anybody are musicians out there, probably other than a half step being the most crunchiest sound, the next biggest one or the farthest away or actually equal note value away would be a tritone, which they used to call the devil's interval back in the day.
Oh, I love educated musicians. This is great. I have no clue what you're talking about. Sorry.
Yeah, you can play it though.
But you've been old a long time, right? So,
yeah,
you've been on the top shelf for a while. So you've seen generations of younger musicians sort of, come through the ranks, so to speak. And do you think there's any difference now with young musicians today versus, 20, 30, 40 years ago? Do you think there's any difference in terms of, what you see in in young musicians?
Mean somebody who thinks he's innovating stuff when he's playing a blues that's straight out of Oscar Peterson or something like that.
However,
But I
put
mean, you know, we do tend to repeat them, you know, every generation kind of like, and then in like 2 or 3 years, that newest generation will think they're onto the newest hot stuff when maybe we did that 20 years ago. So, you know, kind of all circles around over and over again.
right. Right.
I love hearing new musicians come on the scene, and always, you know, if there's a chance of getting them on the scene and working, why, you know, always want to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You still want to keep playing. What's that like now that you're how old are you now?
80. I'll be 83 in December.
Yeah, what man, you're still working hard, man. You're like almost 6-7 days out the week. What keeps you going?
I just love to play. I never get tired of it. You know, I know a lot of musicians get really burned out with music. And I mean, I guess in a way I sort of got burned out playing pop music, but it kind of burned it out for me. I didn't really have a choice because all these singing bass players moved into town, you know. Oh, by the way, since Scott Meter's online, Scott, you and I did a recording session for some advertising people that were definitely out to prove each other that they all knew what they were doing. Bill Hatcher and I are sitting in the studio, knocking out this piece perfectly each time. I think we did 10 times. And you're in the studio with your electronic drums, and you push a button, click, and the rhythmic stuff starts happening. And then when it's all over, you adjust a thing or two here, and then push a button again. And Bill and I are slaving away. And of course, Bill had this clock in the bottom of his guitar. And after after the 10th or maybe 11th take, Bill said, "That's it, not getting any better." Puts his bass in the case, pulls the top down, and said, "That's it. This is some music for George Strait."
That is vintage Hatcher. He does that kind of stuff for real.
Oh yeah,
we're glad of it.
And he was right. I mean, we played it perfectly every single time, you know. And it's just advertising. Well, you know, maybe if you put a little more oomph on this part and a little feel over here, and we're going.
He had already programmed the whole thing.
Oh yeah, he was an excellent studio drummer. So, you know, just that he had that all programmed, you know.
Yeah.
Right. But do you feel like there's some advantages to how you sort of had to just figure things out versus somebody throwing a book in front of you or telling you how to play something? Do you think that that's allowed you to be more creative in what you do?
Well, I'm not sure how the creativity thing comes around, but ear listening, I think, is vitally important. You know, my experience trying to be a teacher was that there were some guys that seemed to be visually oriented, and that they seemed like they might be the guy that should be sitting there in front of a computer composing tunes and not instantaneously creating stuff on the bandstand. And then there were other guys that were ear kind of guys. And they were the guys that probably should be playing the gigs and not sitting there. Of course, you know, the great guys can do all of it, but listening is really important.
Do you ever feel that you're missing something with the academic side, or you don't even care about it?
Yes. Okay. No. Well, you know, I was going to go to Georgia State as a music major once. I was going to take bass lessons, and I was going to learn theory out of, I think it was the Walter Piston book.
Okay.
And so I bought the book and, you know, applied. I had to take an audition. And so they said, "Well, Mr. Starkey, you need to play a prepared piece." And I said, "Well, what prepared piece?" "Well, something out of the literature." "What literature?" "Well, out of the classical literature." So, "Well, I don't know anything out of the classical literature. How about if I play Satin Doll or a blues? How about Satin Doll? I'll play the melody and I'll play a bass line and I'll take a solo." I said, "Okay." So I did that, got through it, everything was fine. So now, Mr. Starkey, you need to play a 2-octave scale. So, "Well, I can't do that. That's why I'm coming here to school, to learn how to do that." He says, well, we have to have you do that anyway. So, I fumble around with an F scale and get all the way up and all that. Everything's fine. And they said, now, Mr. Starkey, you need to take the theory test. And I said, well, I don't know anything about theory. So, well, I'm sorry, but we have to give you the test. So he gives me the test and I get about 7% right. He says, okay, fine. And then a few days later, I get the notice that I've been accepted at the music department of Georgia State. In the meantime, they've got me lined up 5 days a week from noon to 5 in the afternoon with stuff. I'm not sure what all they had me doing. And then this is for 3 credit hours. In the meantime, they want my transfers from St. Lawrence University, from Union College, where I was studying physics, and the University in New Mexico, where I tried to become a music major, but I missed the midterms because I was out on the road for a month, and I missed the finals because I was out on the road for a month. And so while they're waiting for that, the orchestra conductor calls up my wife and says, well, the schedule for this fall with the symphony, the Georgia State Symphony is, it's like 2 or 3 days a week and a concert and all that. And she looks at my book and she says, well, he's got one day open here for a rehearsal, and that's about it. And the guy says, well, no, this is a requirement. He has to do this. And she says, well, I'm sorry, but my husband's working all the time. And he said, well, he'll never make it in the music business if he doesn't do this. And she said, do you know who my husband is? You hired him to play principal bass with your orchestra at Georgia State. And you're telling me that that he has to do this. So I'm sorry. And about that time, my transcripts came in. They said, Mr. Starkey, we think maybe you should try a junior college and get some credits there before we can accept you as a student at Georgia State. And I said, okay, I guess that takes care of my music career. In the meantime, I'm looking at the Walter Piston book and trying to figure out the exercises and saying, I don't know how to play piano. I'll never get this. So in the closet it went.
Yeah, that's the fallacy of academia, because you are already working.
Yeah.
You are already playing music.
I know.
So at Kennesaw State University, I can't speak for other universities, but I will talk about Kennesaw. We are very, very, very lucky and blessed to have Sam Skeleton and the team that we have there, where he recognizes that, right, and says, okay, let's make an appeal for this kid or this whatever, because they already are playing music. They just need to hone this side. So where they probably wouldn't get in, he makes it possible for them to get in.
Generated real good students that come out of there. When they come in to sit at Redline, it's very obvious.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I'll give you a secret, Neal. I come across this all the time, being in like both worlds, the academia world and using my ear for stuff, and that kind of set up. Secretly, those guys, and maybe not so secretly, those guys want to be like y'all. So I always want to ask the question, like, if you're mainly ear player, do you miss the academia side? And the academia side people miss the ear thing, So it's they want to be like y'all as well. So don't worry.
It would be nice to be able to academically tell a musician what to do. Like when when I was trying to deal with drummers with Joe's big band, what is it in the element? What is the drummer playing that makes the rhythm section just lock right in? And what is it with other drummers where the time is just swishy and the whole big band gets squirrely because of it? I had to explain to an R&B drummer that had done a bunch of sessions for the heat of the night. And when we're in rehearsal, he says, man, I don't have any idea what to do. I said, well, not a lot of backbeat on the snare. Use the hi-hat for the 2 and 4. Very light on the bass drum. Spang-a-lang, spang-a-lang, and fills. And he did just fine.
Don't know you were on the heat in the heat of the night, right? What's the name? Well, one of the episodes, the one you were wearing the overalls on. What's the name of that one? Do you remember?
Chiz and the Grand Lady.
Yeah,
Bobby Short has had an affair with the matron of the city, and she's in the audience, and we're doing that stuff. I had to open the show with St. James Infirmary doing the melody, and I was scared.
That's his favorite song. You played with Ray Charles as well, did you?
Pete, at Chastain Park. Yeah,
Did you
yeah.
do
He
the,
was
were you on the
he was
recording of
easy to work
Georgia?
with. The Georgia State theme song that's on PBS, we did essentially a recreation of Georgia,
Okay,
and
cool.
that version is essentially a blues.
I think we have a few questions.
Yeah,
Mhm.
here's a good one right
So
here.
yeah, so let's start with this
This is
one.
from your friend Bill Hatcher.
It says ask Neil about the time he and I played with Oscar Peterson.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. It was a symphony drummer. I think Oscar was not terribly happy with the symphony drummer, but it sure was playing with Oscar Peterson. What does Bill remember about it?
Respond. He said earlier, I came over to Atlanta in 1970 for a recording session, and Neal was on the session. He was the first musician I met in Atlanta. He played a Hofner Beetle bass. He is an Atlanta treasure. Hatcher responds. He says, "Remember, we hung out with him in his RV." Oscar Peterson.
Did we really? Wow.
That's
No, I didn't remember that.
Tall Cotton right there hanging out with them. Incredible
Yes.
player.
So Brad wanted to know what jazz music you were listening to when you first started playing jazz.
First jazz album I heard was Oscar Peterson Trio with Liza Jane on it. That album. Second jazz album I heard. J and K, J.J. Johnson and Kay Winding. That was the second jazz album I heard, and I was sold. And then Martians Come Back, which I can't remember what band that was, and then Portrait in Jazz with Bill Evans.
Yeah, when I got hooked when I heard Oscar Peterson, Nigerian Marketplace. My uncle played a record for me, and I was hooked after that. So Oscar Peterson I couldn't imagine you guys getting a chance to play with him. That must have been incredible.
We did a thing with Buddy DeFranco once with the Cobb Symphony, I think it was, and we finished the concert, and Buddy says, "Yeah, let's play another tune. What should we play?" And I think we came up with Cherokee or something like that. And he says, "Well, yeah, what key do you want to play it in?" I said, "Well, any key you want to play it in." He says, "What tempo?" I said, "I don't know." He says, "How fast can you play it?" So we start playing, and the drummer drops out, and the piano drops out, and it's just the two of us playing Cherokee.
See, John Lamartina says, I saw you play Brown Sugar with Diane Carroll.
Really?
At the
I didn't
Fox.
know I played behind her. No kidding.
You played with so many people, Neal, you forgot.
Yeah.
Tell me about Walter Mitty's.
Walter Mitty, yeah. Mostly I like playing there because Dan Wall was playing, and
Right.
Jan Enrico Scott was doing a very nice job, and then horn players would come by and sit in. I don't think didn't really consider that a main jazz club.
Right.
The Midtown Pub on the corner of Virginia and Highland, it was just an old house.
Okay.
That was a super place to play. The 12th Gate was an old house on 10th Street between Spring Street and West Peachtree. And then the Bistro, which was an old house that's still there as a restaurant on West Peachtree. But we also liked playing the Downtown Cafe, which was on the corner of Virginia and Highland in the basement. And we had some really good stuff there. We also played the Southeast Music Hall, which was in Lindbergh Plaza.
Wow.
Those were really nice venues.
My dude, Dave Strohauer. What's up, Dave? Haven't seen Dave in a minute. He says that he played with Neal and George
Dogias.
Dogias back in
Dogias.
84, 85. So,
wow.
And he says, great to see your smiling face, Neal.
I actually met Dave through Doug Ponier. That's funny.
I remember that name. I haven't seen him in years.
Yeah.
All right, Neal. Well, we're gonna let you go, man, and we will reconvene with some other topics with you at a later date. And yeah, we really appreciate you
aside from being a great musician, you are one of the most giving people I know. You've given a lot to a lot of people.
Oh, wow.
Listen, man, we love you, man. We
thank you.
You know, we owe so much. I mean, the music community is in debt to
Yes.
to you, and you've seen it. You've been there, done that.
But the other thing is, like when you come to the jam session, if you're a bass player, I saw Billy in the chat, Billy Ross. Guys, come out and hear this cat play, and then relieve him. Let him hear you play as well. I'm gonna ask the question, Neal. You be you. I'll be a bass player. Hey, Mr. Starkey, I heard you play the sharp 11 on the 5 chord, and I was wondering how'd you come up with that? Now, Neal, you answer.
I went to the universal body of osmotic knowledge.
See what I'm saying? That's what's gonna happen.
But they need to hear that, though. That's what I'm saying.
I wish I knew. I wish I knew what I was doing.
Well, come see him next Wednesday. I'll be there at Red Light Cafe, and
wonderful.
A whole slew of other gigs that Neal will be on.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Neal. We really appreciate it, man, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Man, great cat, man. Love that cat, man.
I mean, there's just nobody like him.
Nobody like Neal, man.